As an aside to our normal adventure videos, in this video I'm going to review and explain why we chose the Honda Crosstourer to do our adventures on. Let's start with some context. We've been riding motorcycles for 40 years. In the 1980s we had mainly trial bikes like the Yamaha DT, Kawasaki KDX and KL, Suzuki TS, Honda MTX etc. We also had the obligatory two-stroke road bikes like the Yamaha RD350LC, and at one point we had something in between that nowadays would be called an adventure bike, the Yamaha TDR250. That was fun. I used to work in the motorcycle industry, so also experienced riding many other bikes. If there was one thing I learnt, it was this: don't completely rely on the motorcycle media or anyone else to decide what bike is right for you. For instance, many years ago we had the use of a Honda VT500 for a few weeks. This was the successor to the CX500 and seen as an old man's bike. It wasn't a bad bike, the motorcycle media didn't slate it, but they certainly didn't drawl over it either. But we really liked riding it. I recently bought a very neglected one and turned it into a rat bike. My advice is to think about what the bike has to do, what you would like it to do, how much you have to spend, are you able to handle it, and what it looks like. As soon as you start to think about these things, you will realise they compete as much, if not more, than they complement. Finally, it's only fair that you know we only test rode one other bike, and we hadn't ridden a Crosstourer until we bought ours. Understandably, some will say we should have tried other options and at least test rode a Crosstourer before committing ourselves. There are several reasons we didn't test a range of bikes, including time and lack of availability, but mainly the fact our research kept bringing us back to the Honda Crosstourer. Thankfully, we quickly realised we made the right decision and are very satisfied with the choice. Let me explain why. I will break it down into three sections: why we chose this style, why we chose this size, and why we chose the Crosstourer. The bike had to replace our ageing 1998 Honda Blackbird. For those that don't know, the Blackbird is a sports bike that does a pretty good job of long distance touring. At the time, sports bikes were all the rage. The Blackbird was the ideal sports bike for two-up riding and touring. The Blackbird had taken us on many adventures at home and abroad, but not only was it over 20 years old with 50,000 miles on the clock, we were coming around to the idea we might appreciate a more upright riding position. We had already upgraded the seat and fitted higher, flatter bars, and were contemplating further improvements, such as a higher screen, when we realised we were trying to turn it into something it was never going to be, and in doing so, it would no longer be the great bike it is. We were coming around to the idea many other bikers had already accepted. We needed something in either the adventure style or modern sports tourer. The granddaddy of adventure bikes is the BMW 1200 GS. Other manufacturers had produced similar bikes, but it wasn't until the GS market share grew in the 2000s that other makers started to take notice. The catalyst was Ewan McGregor and Charlie Boorman's series of motorcycle overlanding films that started with The Long Way Round. Many people, not just bikers, dreamt of replicating their adventures, and today the adventure motorcycle is the most popular bike style. That said, clearly most of them never see a green lane, let alone the Silk Road. They are the motorcycle equivalent of the Chelsea Tractor, a Range Rover that never leaves London. A lot of us hung on to our sports bikes hoping that it was just a fad, but our ageing bodies and in some cases the requirements of the pillion passenger got us looking at the adventure bike. Not for some 20,000 mile around the globe trip, but as a practical alternative that handled and performed nearly as well. Others have chosen another alternative, the modern sports tourer. This is a sports bike that's less race focused, has better wind protection, higher bars, lower foot pegs and luggage to complement its lines. I guess that's what I was trying to turn the Blackbird into. Either way, the shift from sports bikes has been so profound that the days of the most thoroughbred of sports bikes, such as the Yamaha R1, appeared to be numbered. So, an adventure bike it would be. Or would it? The size of the bike was the easiest part of the decision-making process. It needed to haul two of us comfortably as well as luggage, including at times a full camping setup. I love the idea of the Yamaha 700 Tenere or the KTM 890 Adventure. If it was just me, that's probably what I'd get. I certainly wouldn't want anything larger and would possibly go for something even smaller and lighter. But going back to my earlier advice, what the bike has to do, we needed a bike strong and powerful enough to cope with our demands, so it was going to have to be big. So why didn't we go for one of the more obvious big adventure bikes like the BMW 1200 GS, the KTM 1290 Super Adventure, or even the Suzuki 1050 V-Strom? We certainly looked at all of those and more. Let's start with the non-Japanese bikes. We've always had Japanese bikes. I'm fairly handy at servicing and repairing them. Parts are readily available and reasonably priced. Generally, they are very dependable. Unfortunately, from my research, I wasn't always getting a good feeling about BMW, KTM and Ducati. We liked the performance and the exotic appeal, but the initial cost, expensive servicing and at least the perception of reliability issues put us off. We got very close to purchasing a Suzuki V-Strom on a couple of occasions, but for various reasons it didn't happen. The one bike we did take for a test ride was the latest Honda Africa Twin. We were impressed. It was deceptively quick and handled well, but we felt we needed more power and comfort. If you look at the range of adventure bikes and sports tourers, you may notice almost an overlap that some bikes fit into. I would put the Kawasaki Versys and Honda Crosstourer into that. Indeed, the Kawasaki was on our list of candidates, but the Crosstourer just looked like it was more at home off-road. Is it as capable off-road as a KTM 1290? Obviously not, but I would argue there's less gap between the 1290 and Crosstourer than there is between the 1290 and, let's say, the Yamaha 700 Tenere. What's my point? None of the big adventure bikes are ideal off-roaders, but for what we want to do, two up, the Crosstourer will be fine. So, we kept coming back to the Honda Crosstourer. Let me tell you why. The engine, and much of the bike for that matter, has been lifted from the VFR1200F sports bike. In fact, the Crosstourer is called the VFR1200X. The VFR1200F got mixed reviews. When it was launched, sports bikes were still the benchmark, and the VFR was less race-focused, had slightly quirky styling, and practical compromises such as shaft drive, pillion consideration, and a fairing that gave some wind protection. Despite its 160 horsepower, it wasn't compared favourably. On the other hand, it's one of the highest rated bikes by owners. Some of the original bike's undeserved reputation has rubbed off on the Crosstourer, but the consensus is that it works better as an adventure-styled bike. It has a great reputation for reliability. It may not do any one thing exceptionally well, but it does everything very well. Its 1200cc V4 engine has been retuned for the Crosstourer. At 127 brake horsepower it produces less power but more torque. The engine has pedigree and is a peach. It's the pinnacle of Honda's commitment to V4 four-stroke engine development that started with the ill-fated attempt to take on the GP racing two-strokes in the 1980s with the oval-pistoned NR500. There's a great YouTube video out there titled The Incredible History of the Honda VFR by Hero RR if you want to know more. Sadly, the Crosstourer seems destined to be the last V4 Honda will ever produce, as emissions, economics and future uncertainty take their toll. Conversely, Ducati recently took up the V4 baton and have captivated the market with their Panigale, Multistrada and Street Fighter. Maybe Honda should have stuck around. You may have heard how the Crosstourer doesn't stack up against rivals when it comes to modern technology. It has a rather basic LED dash, no cruise control, no electronic riding modes and certainly no electronic suspension. Having never experienced electronic riding modes and suspension, I don't know what I'm missing, but my take is that it's a lot of stuff to go wrong that I probably wouldn't use much anyway. It has ABS and traction control. I think it was an oversight for Honda not to incorporate cruise control, especially in the later models, but I have found a solution for that. I would also appreciate a better dash, but have found a solution for that as well. I will cover these and a whole host of other upgrades and improvements in another video coming soon. Finally, the clincher. Although you can get it as a manual, this Crosstourer has DCT automatic transmission. What does that mean? Well, firstly, there's no clutch lever. You can ride it like a scooter, twist and go, with no need to operate a clutch at all. But, unlike most scooters, it isn't continuously variable transmission. It has 6 separate gears and selects them automatically. I'm not sure how it manages to sense what gear is best, but it does a really good job of it most of the time and makes it feel like a conventional gearbox. Lower gears are a bit clunky, as they are with a manual gearbox, but as they get higher the changes are almost imperceptible. One of the benefits for 2-up riding is the elimination of passenger rock. This is when the pillion rocks back and forth as the rider shifts gears. The DCT pretty much eliminates passenger rock without having to concentrate. There are 2 modes, drive and sport. Sport holds onto each gear a bit longer to enable the bike to be revved through the gears. Drive shifts up surprisingly quickly, much quicker than I would normally shift. You're in 6th gear at 35 mph. Initially, I found myself using sport, but now use drive most of the time. The bike's got loads of low down grunt and the best linear power delivery of any bike I've ridden, so it can easily cope with the higher gears at low speeds. In either mode, a quick twist of the throttle tells the bike you want to get a move on, and it not only selects a lower gear, but will rev higher without changing up. That's not all. You can revert to a manual mode. Using small paddles on the left-hand switch, you can shift up and down. The bike will take over, but only to stop you stalling it. You pretty much can ride it like a manual, but don't need to use the clutch. In addition to the paddle, I've added the genuine Honda gear lever that I can operate with my foot, as you would with a manual. I'll tell you more about that in the upgrades video. You can also use the manual shifter in both of the auto modes to select another gear, for instance, if you wanted to shift down for an overtake. The bike senses you want more response and stays there while anticipating your next actions. It will revert to auto when it senses you no longer need the lower gear. The whole effect of DCT creates a more relaxing ride, but beware, in combination with the wind protection and solid stance, it also has the effect of feeling a lot slower than it actually is. It's a bit strange to begin with, especially not having a clutch lever, but I quickly got used to it and absolutely love it. It allows you to enjoy the ride without having to constantly gear shift or worry about stalling or getting a good pull away. Okay, so the downsides. Well, if you're not already aware, there are 2 things that an internet search will quickly highlight. The lesser of the 2 is the throttle response at low speeds. Some riders have complained of its lack of smoothness being jerky at low speeds. I think I understand what they mean. At low revs and speed, the response to small movements at the throttle quickly transmit to the rear wheel. It becomes most apparent when riding over rough ground or when going over a speed hump, when the impact causes movement of the throttle hand. I very quickly adapted, and it really hasn't been too much of an issue for me. Some say the DCT is better at coping with it. Apparently, there's an electronic gadget you can plug in to correct the issue, but I really don't feel the need. The main issue is the weight. The bike is heavy, and because it hasn't been designed to hold that weight low down like some other big adventure bikes, you feel it in certain circumstances. At very low speed, it feels top heavy. You need to be a confident, experienced rider to handle it. As soon as you're over about 8 mph though, there's no issue with the weight whatsoever. You're aware it's still there, but it's actually a benefit because it makes the bike feel very well planted. Perhaps the biggest issue with the weight is when you're pushing the bike around. It's hard. I'm okay with it, but it's not easy at times. When we're together, we can easily do it between us. Like any bike of this size and power, it's not for the novice rider or anyone who lacks confidence with such a machine. But the Honda Crosstourer is exactly the right bike for us. It's a shame Honda stopped making the Crosstourer in 2020, even more so when it seems likely to be the last of the V4 Hondas. Honda has a well-deserved reputation for excellently engineered, reliable and brilliantly built motorcycles, but what is often overlooked is their vision and willingness to think outside of the box. Unfortunately, this hasn't always gone down well with the motorcycle pundits who obsess over a few miles per hour or brake horsepower and need to be able to categorise and compare everything. Thankfully, generations of seasoned motorcyclists have caught Honda's vision and bought them in droves. Now that's what you call the power of dreams.